क्लिक कर दिया. So I will be speaking on my patient is bleeding. Okay. So we'll be discussing upper GI bleed, lower GI bleed, and how to control GI bleed. Okay. So the GI bleed is commonly seen in ICU setting. Okay. So it originates from upper or lower GI tract. So I will start with the case scenario. So there is a case of 45-year gentleman present to the emergency department with complaint of vomiting of bright red blood. He also gives history of chronic alcohol abuse and similar history of vomiting in the past. He has been passing black stool since last 3 days, and he again vomit a large amount of the blood while examining, and he has become more drowsy and his vital are deteriorating. He has tachycardia, tachypnea, hypertension, and also desaturating and requiring oxygen support. So what is your diagnosis and how will you proceed? Upper GI bleed. Okay, and how will you proceed? So basically by the clinical presentation and from history you can easily make out this patient has upper GI bleed. So how much is the amount? So with the history you can easily make out more than 30%. Okay. So here you can see this patient having hypotension, which is supine hypertension. Okay. So this is in this patient has a grade 3 hemorrhagic shock. Okay. So this patient having massive upper GI bleed. Okay. So with the history and with the clinical presentation you can easily make out which type of the shock. Okay. So while treating upper GI bleed or any type of hemorrhagic shock, you need to find out site of bleeding and the severity of bleeding, and you also need to look for any comorbidities. Okay. So answer is, you all know this patient has massive upper GI bleed and would require urgent stabilization. Okay. So this patient is becoming drowsy. Okay. So is this patient require airway protection? Yes. So this patient require airway protection. Okay, to prevent the aspiration. Okay, and also the optimization of circulation. So how will you optimize circulation in this patient? Okay. So you will require 2 large bore cannula for optimization of circulation and infusion of crystalloid fluid. Okay. So the clinical feature of hemorrhagic shock you all know is very important. So early detection of shock is very important, and in early shock what happen? The patient having tachycardia, tachypnea, okay, and altered mental status. Okay, so it's very important to detect the early shock. Okay, and in later stage patient develop multi-organ dysfunction. Okay, so once the multi-organ dysfunction set in, it's very difficult to reverse back. Okay, so it's very important, physical examination is very important while treating hemorrhagic shock. Okay, so in later stage what happen? Patients may develop multi-organ dysfunction and acidosis, electrolyte disturbances and severe shock. Okay, and that cannot be reversible. Okay, so this classification is very much important to look for the classes of hemorrhage. Okay, so this is a classification you can see. So blood loss of at least 50 to 30% that lead to a orthostatic hypertension. Okay, and when there is a blood loss of at least 30 to 40 or more than 40%, the patient may develop supine hypertension. Okay, so this is very important classification. Okay, so how will you treat the circulatory collapse? So for that you will require 2 large bore peripheral cannula. Okay, and central venous access is not immediately required. Okay, so if the BP is not responding to the fluid resuscitation and your patients will develop hypertension, then you will require central venous placement. Okay. So so while putting cannula, immediately you have to send the lab investigation. Okay, and you need to give crystalloid fluid bolus and try to control the bleeding. And at this point, you need to consult gastroenterologist also. Okay, so what are the investigations that you will send? So the routine investigations like CBC, RFT, LFT and coagulation studies, blood group cross matching and ABG or BBG. So the ABG that may provide your rough estimation of hemoglobin and also the acidosis and the lactate parameter. Okay, so it's very important. You can do ABG or BBG. It's important. Okay. So what order will you give to the blood bank? So you will need to arrange PRBC, plasma and platelet, and sometimes in life saving situations in massive bleed you can give a without cross match. Okay. So what can be the cause of GI bleed? So you all know what are the causes of upper GI bleed? Most common are the gastric varix and the gastric ulcer and duodenal ulcer 50%, and the varix is around 10 to 20%, and the gastric varix, okay, it's also around 10 to 20%. And when there is a history of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, alcohol abuse, okay, and the reflex esophagitis is account for about 2 to 5%. Mallory-Weiss tear is around 5 to 10%. And the gastric carcinoma, this is not common, and the hemorrhagic gastropathy and other non-common causes are the portal gastropathy, aortic graft surgery with the fistula and the hereditary telangiectasia. Okay, so these are the other non-common causes of GI bleed. So in this picture you can see this is a ligament of Treace. So the upper GI bleed that take place proximal to the ligament Treace. Okay, so upper GI bleed that takes place from the esophagus, stomach and the upper part of the small intestine. Okay, so patient may present with the hematemesis. Hematemesis, you all know, the vomiting of fresh old blood and proximal to the Treace. So if patient presented with the hematemesis, that indicate patient having upper GI source. Okay, patient may present with melena. So melena that indicate the passage of black or foul smelling stool, and usually the source is upper GI source. Okay, and the hematochezia, if patient may present with the passage of bright red blood from the rectum, so it indicates lower GI bleed. But sometimes if the patient is having active upper GI bleed, that can also lead to the hematochezia. And the upper bleed when the patient is not apparent to the bleed. Okay. So the history taking is also very much important. The patient should be asked for the medical history. Why medical history is important? Because if the patient is on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, okay, and patient is on antiplatelet medication, when the patient is on anticoagulant medication, iron supplementation, so it's important to ask medical history. Okay, because if the patient is having patient is on non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, there is a high chances of peptic ulcer disease. Okay, if the patient is on warfarin, then sometimes you will require reversal of anticoagulation. Okay, so the medical history is important, and patient should be asked for the past history. When the patient is having varices or total hypertensive gastropathy, so it's common in the liver disease patient and when the patient is having alcohol abuse. Okay, so the aorta entering fistula, it's common with the patients with the history of AAA, aortic abdominal aneurysm and the aortic graft disease. Okay, and the angiodysplasia is common when there is a history of renal disease, aortic stenosis and hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia. And peptic ulcer disease are more common when the patient is having H. pylori infection, when the patient is having use of non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug and use of smoking. Okay, so this important history to ask. And malignancy common when the patient is having history of alcohol, smoking and H. pylori infection. And the marginal ulcer is common in the patients with the gastroenteric anastomosis. Okay, so the history of comorbid illness is also important, because when the patient is having coronary artery disease, pulmonary disease, so these patients are more prone to, more susceptible for the hypoxia. Okay, and such patients will require higher hemoglobin as compared to the other patients. Okay, so our target is around 7 to 8 in CAD patient, and when the patient is having coronary artery disease and low ejection fraction. Okay. And when the patient is having renal disease and heart failure, they are more prone to development of the fluid overload. So while initial resuscitation, this patient will require more and aggressive assessment, fluid assessment of this patient. Okay, because they are more prone to development of the fluid overload. And when the patient is having coagulopathy, thrombocytopenia, significant hepatic dysfunction, so in such patients, it's difficult to control bleeding. So such patients may require blood product like platelet or plasma, okay, for the control of bleeding. And when the patient is having dyspnea, hepatic encephalopathy, so these patients are more prone to development of the aspiration. Okay, so the emergency intubation should be considered in such patient. Okay. So what are the risk factors for the varicose in upper GI bleed? So the cirrhosis with the hepatic venous pressure of more than 12 mm mercury, and the child C cirrhosis. Okay. So how can we diagnose varices? So esophagogastroduodenoscopy. So is the modality of choice for diagnosis of esophageal varix. And varix can be divided into small and the large. Okay, so small less than 5 mm and large is more than 5 mm. Okay, so what are the goal of evaluation? So as I said, our goal of evaluation to assess the severity of bleeding, to assess the site of bleeding and associated comorbid condition. Okay. So how to manage upper GI bleed, variceal bleed. Okay, so here I will be talking on variceal bleed, and later on I will talk about the non-variceal bleed. So varices are more common in chronic liver disease patient. Okay, so these patients may present with the hepatic encephalopathy. Okay, so this patient will require emergent intubation, semi-emergent intubation, elective intubation to prevent the aspiration. Okay, and for the optimization of circulation, this patient may require 2 large bore cannula, and blood product should be transfused to optimize hemodynamics of the patient. And sometimes these patients may require FFP and platelet transfusion to correct the coagulopathy. So is there any role of PCC here? So what is PCC? PCC is a prothrombin complex concentrate. Okay, so PCC should be used when there is a life-threatening massive GI bleed and when there is a risk of volume overload. Okay, so you can give PCC. So PCC available in 4 factor or 3 factor. Okay, so when patient is having low ejection fraction, like have severe LV dysfunction, ejection fraction only 20%, then in that condition you can consider to give PCC rather than plasma, because plasma that can lead to a volume overload. Okay. So now Rice tube insertion is basically a controversial, okay, because when the patient is having known variation and if you put rice tube, that can further lead to a bleeding. Okay. So the rice tube is to be put just to look for the ongoing bleeding. Okay, and it also helps in clearing the gastric particle, blood and clots. Okay, prior to the endoscopy. So the PRBC transfusion should be targeted at a target of HB less than 7. So we keep it around 7 to 8 in CAD patient, but when the patient is having CLD, if hemoglobin is less than 7, then we'll give blood product. Okay. and avoid the over transfusion as it may precipitate rebleeding and it increases the portal pressure. So what happens in CLD, if we give more blood product, then it will lead to increase the chances of rebleeding, okay, and it increases the portal pressure. So the platelet transfusion if the patient was on aspirin or the clopidogrel. So is there any role of tranexamic acid here? So the tranexamic acid, as per studies, they have no added advantage over the conventional therapy. Okay. So should we give antibiotic to this patient? So the cirrhotic patients are more prone to the gram-negative bacterial sepsis. Okay. So antibiotics should be given for 7 days. Okay. If the patient have child C cirrhosis, are more prone to development of gram-negative septicemia. So it should be given for 7 days. Okay. So what is the specific therapy for the variceal bleed? You all know acid suppression, prokinetics, vasopressin and its analogous, somatostatin and its analogous, and endoscopy therapy. Okay. So now coming to the acid suppression. So we use PPP, proton pump inhibitor. So how it works? It neutralizes the gastric pH and stabilizes the clot. Okay. So all patients with the upper GI bleed should be started on PPI at the time of presentation and continue for 72 hours after the source has been controlled. Okay. So dose is 80 mg bolus followed by 8 mg per hour infusion. Okay. So the PPI decreases hospital length of stay and need of second look endoscopy. So now coming to the prokinetic. So the goal of use of prokinetic agent is to improve the gastric visualization at the time of endoscopy by clearing the stomach of blood, clots and the food. Okay, so we use metoclopramide. We don't use erythromycin. In some institute they use erythromycin in the dose of 250 mg 30 minutes prior to endoscopy. Okay, so so the studies says that it increases the visualization of during endoscopy. Okay, so it's better for visualization. Okay. So now coming to the vasopressin and analogous. So vasopressin is the most potent splanchnic vasoconstrictor and it reduces the blood flow to all the splanchnic organ, thereby leading to a decrease in the portal venous inflow and decreases the portal pressure. So it has the clinical usefulness of vasopressin is limited by its multiple side effects. Okay, so its side effects are the cardiac and peripheral ischemia, it causing arrhythmia, hypertension and the bowel ischemia. Okay. So the terlipressin is a synthetic analogous of the vasopressin and that has a longer biological activity and significant fewer side effects and is effective in the controlling the acute variceal hemorrhage and has been associated with the decreased mortality. Okay, so dose is 2 mg every 4 hours and can be titrated down by to the 1 mg every 4 hours once the hemorrhage is controlled. So terlipressin should not be used when there is a coronary artery disease and age is more than 60 years. Okay. So in that case, if terlipressin is contraindicated, then somatostatin can be used. Okay. So the somatostatin inhibits the release of vasodilator hormones such as glucagon, directly causing the splanchnic vasoconstriction and decrease the portal flow. Useful in the patients with the advanced age and cardiac issue. Okay. So it has a shorter half-life, disappear within the minute of a bolus and dose is 250 microgram bolus followed by 250 microgram per hour infusion and to be continued for 3 to 5 days. And you can also use octreotide. Dose is 50 microgram IV bolus followed by 50 microgram per hour infusion. Okay. So now coming to the endoscopy therapy. So the endoscopic therapy is currently the definitive treatment of choice for the active varicose hemorrhage. There is a two form of endoscopic therapy, sclerotherapy, and the another is endoscopic varicose band ligation. So the sclerotherapy, what they do, they inject the sclerosant solution into the varix through the needle that is passed through the endoscope. Okay, and the endoscopic varicose band ligation that involve they deployed the band over the varix. Okay, in the 5 centimeter of distal to 5 centimeter of esophagus. Okay. So what is the role of balloon tamponade? So what is balloon tamponade? How will you create it? Sangstecken Blackmore tube. Okay. So is to be used for the short-term hemostasis and used when the emergent endoscopy not available or when the massive bleed present, when nothing is visible to the through the endoscope. Okay. So it has got a two lumen, gastric lumen and the esophagus lumen, and one is a gastric aspiration port. Okay, and another is a Minnesota tube. It has an additional esophageal suction port above the esophageal balloon. Okay, so this is only for just to buy time for the definitive therapy. Okay, so this is a, you can see this is a Sangstecken tube. This is a, these are the holes. This is a gastric balloon and this is a esophageal balloon, and this is a gastric port here. Okay. And this is a Minnesota tube, and here you can see there is a esophageal drainage port is here. Okay. So this is a gastric drainage port and this is a gastric inflation port. This is a esophageal inflation port and this is a esophageal drainage port is here. Okay. So it's basically for prevention of aspiration. Okay. So this esophageal gastric extra esophageal aspiration port is to prevent the aspiration. Okay. So all the patients should be intubated before attempting SB tube insertion. Okay. And after inserting the tube through the nose tube by around 50 centimeter, inflate the gastric balloon by 250 cc of air and pull the tube out till the time resistance is felt. So the before insertion you have to properly lubricate the tube and then insert to the nose tube because it's very stiff. Okay, and sometimes it can lead to epistaxis. So this indicated that gastric balloon is at the gastroesophageal junction and the tube is then attached to the traction pulley. So how will you confirm its position? So chest X-ray to be done to confirm its position. Okay, so here you can see this is the gastric balloon. Okay, this is the gastric balloon. You can also confirm its position by the ultrasound. Okay. So what if the bleeding continue even after gastric balloon inflation? So what will you do? So inflate the esophageal balloon with around 25 cc of air and arrange for the emergent endoscopy. Okay, and inflate the esophageal balloon in the next 6 hours. Otherwise, what happen? Mucosal ischemia and esophageal perforation increases. Chances of esophageal perforation will increases. Okay. So now coming to our patients, endoscopy varicose ligation was done in our patient and adequate pharmacological therapy was given and bleeding has stopped. Now again after 1 day a fresh episode of bleeding started and in massive in nature. So what will you do now? So this is a case of refractory bleeding. Okay. So what will you do in case of refractory bleeding? So tips. Okay. So what is tips? The tips is only indicated when the traditional therapy has failed. Okay, and patient has a refractory bleeding. Okay, so TIPS is basically a transjugular intrahepatic portal systemic shunt. Okay, so how it works? So it reduces the portal pressure. Okay, so significantly reduces the portal blood pressure and thus bleeding from the varix. So what are the major complications of TIPS? So post TIPS, what happens? Patient develops into the volume overload. There is a chances of HE and stent occlusion. Okay, so these are the major complications of TIPS. So how they did? So it is done by the intervention radiologists. What they do? They put a guide wire through the interjugular vein and that passes into the hepatic vein, and from the hepatic vein they puncture the portal vein. Okay, and they put this stent. Okay, so this is basically a between the hepatic vein and the portal vein. Okay, so this reduces the portal pressure. Okay. So what are the contraindication of the TIPS? So absolute contraindication are the primary prevention of varicose bleeding. So it should not be done from the primary prevention of varicose bleeding. Only indicated when there is a refractory bleeding is there. Okay, when there is a congestive heart failure is not indicated, severe tricuspid regurgitation, severe pulmonary hypertension, multiple hepatic cysts, uncontrolled systemic infection or sepsis, and unrelieved biliary obstruction. So it's not indicated. And relative contraindications are the hepatocellular carcinoma is there, obstruction of all the hepatic vein, when there is a portal vein thrombosis is there, and moderate pulmonary hypertension is there, severe coagulopathy, thrombocytopenia if platelet count is less than 20, and in the presence of hepatic encephalopathy it should not be done. Okay. So these algorithm how to manage upper GI bleed. Okay, so in case of hematemesis melena, so first to start teletracing and endoscopy should be done to confirm the site of bleeding, and endotherapy should be done whether the varicose ligation or the sclerotherapy. Okay. If there is no further bleeding, then start the beta blocker and complete course of varicose ligation. Okay, if patient further bleed and torrential bleed is there, then you can consider for the balloon tamponade for 24 hours. And if the and after that we have to do a varicose ligation. If it is successful, then continue with the beta blocker and complete course of varicose ligation. If further bleeding is there, then you need to consider for the TIPS. Okay. So if the further non-torrential bleeding is there and further varicose ligation should be done. If the source is controlled, then start beta blocker and complete course of varicose ligation. If the further bleeding is there, then consider for the TIPS. Okay, so now coming to the non-varicose bleeding. So non-varicose bleeding is the peptic ulcer disease, the most common cause of non-varicose bleeding. Okay, so this is a Forest classification of peptic ulcer. This is an endoscopic characteristic. So they divided into the 5 types. Okay, so the clean base type 3, if it is flat pigmentations type 2C, adherent clot type 2B, non-bleeding visible vessel type 2A, and active bleeding type A. Okay, so this is a Forest classification of peptic ulcer disease with the prevalence and the post endoscopy rebuild disc. So here you can see the prevalence is decreases as the grade increases, and the chances of rebuild has increases as the grade increases. Okay. So how will you treat the non-varicose bleed? So there are three therapy: the injection therapy, thermal therapy, and mechanical therapy. Okay. So in injection therapy, what they do? They inject ADR, epinephrine. Okay. In thermal therapy, APC and heater probe should be applied at the base of the ulcer. Okay. And in mechanical therapy, what they do? They apply the hemostatic clip application should be done at the ulcer site. Okay. So the studies they have shown that the hemoclip is more superior than the thermal and the injection therapy. Okay, and along with that, we should continue with the PPI, and if patient is having H. pylori infection, then the H. pylori treatment should be done. Okay. So now coming to the lower GI bleed. So you all know the causes of lower GI bleed. So most common causes are the diverticular bleed. Okay. So the major cause of colonic bleed are the diverticular disease, other are the vascular malformation, ischemic colitis, hemorrhoids, inflammatory bowel disease, neoplasia, and the radiation enteropathy. Okay. So these are the risk stratification for the lower GI bleed. So for ICU, we need to consider admission if patient age is more than 60 years, if the patient is hemodynamically unstable, and if there is evidence of gross rectal bleeding, if patient is on aspirin or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and with the significant comorbidity. So this patient will require ICU admission. Okay. So again, this history taking, abdominal examination, and for lower GI bleed, the digital rectal examination and proctoscopy is important. Okay, and endoscopy should be done to look for the site of bleeding and the cause of bleeding. Okay, so these are the some procedure technique for the evaluation of lower GI bleed. Okay, so the radionuclide imaging, it's basically a non-invasive and is more sensitive than the CT angiography, and that can detect the bleeding of around 0.1 ml per minute and can be repeated for the intermediate bleeding also. Disadvantage has to be performed during the active bleeding, poor localization of the bleeding site, and is non-therapeutic and not widely available. CT angiography, it's basically a non-invasive, acutely localized bleeding source, provide anatomical detail, widely available, 0.3 to 0.5 ml per minute, okay, and has to be performed during the active bleeding, non-therapeutic, radiation and IV contrast exposure is there, okay. So for that, you need to check patient renal parameter before doing CT angiography, okay. Now angiography, what are the advantages of angiography? Acutely localized bleeding source, therapy possible with the super selective embolization. So with the angiography, you can also embolize the bleeding vessel to control the bleeding. Okay, and does not require the bowel preparation also. And it can detect the bleeding if the bleeding rate is 0.5 to 1 ml per minute. Disadvantage of the has to be performed during active bleeding and the potential for the serious complications. And the colonoscopy, it's also require preparation, and the precise diagnosis and the localized regardless of the active bleeding or the type of lesion. Endoscopic therapy is possible with the colonoscopy, and need colonic preparation for optimal visualization, risk of sedation in the acutely bleeding patients, and this definitive bleeding source immediately identified. So with the colonoscopy, preparation is required and you can easily identify the source and you can control the source of bleeding. So now coming to the intervention, the colonoscopic hemostatic technique. So again the IVR injection, hemoclip and coagulation. Okay, so if the colonic hemostatic technique fails, then embolization should be done. The selective and super selective embolization should be performed by intervention radiologist. Okay, and if the embolization fails, then surgery should be considered, or localized segmental resection or the subtotal colectomy should be performed. Thank you.